Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Very Low Production Values Sphere podcast. This is episode 5. This time I get the episode number right, because on the previous recording, I got the episode number wrong, because that's how we do things. It's very high production values, very professional production. But joking aside, my guest today is somebody who I always enjoy talking to, Mark Krikorian, who's the executive director of the Center for Immigration Studies. I hope that I got that right. If not, you will correct me. I'm just going to preface this by saying that CIS is, as somebody whose day job is to read the output of, most Washington think tanks every day. CIS does some of the best work just in terms of the rigor and the quality in this town, which is all the more noteworthy because they're essentially alone in on their side of that argument, because the amount of funding and studies and so on the pro-immigration side of the argument is enormous, and the restrictionists, not just people who think borders are good, but people who are actual restrictionists. And I think, there should be an argument that involves all perspectives, and all perspectives should be adequately defended. But CIS, they fight. I don't want to say they fight a lonely fight. That sounds too depressing. But they do very well with the resources they have, and they do excellent work. And so I'm always happy to talk with people who fit that description. So, do you have anything to add to that very laudatory introduction?
It would be embarrassing if I did, I guess. So let me only say that at least I'm not in my bedroom. I'm in my office. So this is also at this end, is a low production value operation as well.
How dare you? This is not a bedroom. It's a guest bedroom slash
Okay.
home office.
There
All
you go.
right. This is very different.
Totally different.
My bedroom has a bigger bed than this. I'm not
Okay.
a monk. All right. So I've written down a list of questions there. So last time I interviewed you, my first question was about the Biden border crisis, and in the intervening time, we've had an election, and so the some of the underlying topics are the same, but the current events are different, which is we have a new administration that's about to take office. So my first question is, what do you think of the appointments?
Well, I'm pretty pleased, obviously, with Tom Homan, who's going to be the border czar. And in a sense, I think what that means is he's going to be kind of Secretary of Homeland Security, but for immigration. Whereas
Right.
the actual Secretary of Homeland Security, Kristi Noem, governor of South Dakota, I think, and I have no inside knowledge on this, but I think is going to be Secretary of Homeland Security for not immigration. In other words, for FEMA, for Secret Service, for TSA, for cybersecurity. There's plenty of stuff for her
Right.
to do. It would make sense to do it that way in order to divide responsibilities so they're not butting heads. It just came out recently that the president selected Rodney Scott for head of Customs and Border Protection. He was the former head of the Border Patrol. Very good, excellent choice. And so he'll now be head of the agency that Border Patrol is part of, but also includes the the regular inspectors at the ports of entry. So that's an outstanding choice. They did name the ICE director. He's a career ICE guy, and he comes out of the I part of ICE instead of the C part of ICE, because ICE is immigration and customs enforcement.
Right.
Why they put them together, it's a little bit of a mystery, because at the border, immigration and customs should be combined, obviously, because you're screening people for,
Right.
various things. Inside the country, what's happened is that the customs people are far more interested in chasing after people who have making, counterfeit Gucci purses or importing, whatever antiquities from the Middle East illegally or something like that. They don't want to have anything to do with immigration. The interesting thing is that the ICE director that President Trump has nominated or will be nominating, however that works, is from the immigration side. So that's actually
Right.
a very good
Right.
sign. And there are some other jobs that they still have to, immigration related, like in State Department and elsewhere. But so far, it's looking very good.
Yeah, I mean, I think so too. Everybody loves Stephen Miller, who was very effective the first time around, or so everybody says. This is one of my favorite Washington things. I may have told you this already. I love the fact that in Washington, czar means the opposite of what czar means everywhere else, because the concept of a czar is an autocrat. In Washington, a czar is a bureaucratic coordination position, meaning you have no intrinsic decision making power. It can be very powerful position insofar as the president backs you, but you have the office itself has no power. And so czar in Washington means the opposite of a czar. It means somebody whose power depends on other people.
Right, right. Yeah.
Um, but I'm sure on the issue of immigration, I don't think that's going to be a problem. It's just very funny.
Yeah,
Um,
in that respect, the president is the czar, and the czar is the czarevich or something like
right.
that. Yeah,
He's the
right.
czar's envoy.
Right. Anyway,
Um, there's so the funny thing about customs, so there's, and I'm not sure if it's international law. This is just going to be a ridiculous story. Um, the so in theory, in civilized countries, if you want to search someone, if you want to search their property, if you want to detain them as law enforcement, there are legal rules that specify you can't just do it. But under international law, there's an exception for customs for the obvious reason that if somebody gets into the is trying to get into the country, you have to search, or you may have to search them, and it would be absurd if you had to like go talk to a judge every time.
right.
And so at borders, customs officers have sort of search and detention rights that are uh, completely different from those that normal law enforcement officers have. And at least in France, I don't know if this is international law or just French law. This is true at borders and within 20 kilometers of international waterways. The Seine is an international waterway, so what I've just described includes the entire city of Paris.
Okay.
So I have fantasies of like the president of France using the customs as like his his police that can detain and search anyone and everything within the city limits of Paris because it's part of the customs police jurisdiction. Um, anyway, so good appointments. Okay, so next question is
Just Pascal, to,
yeah,
to sort of give you the context on the U.S. version of what you described.
yeah,
Um, it doesn't apply to regular customs, but within 100 miles of an international border, including coasts if necessary, the border
right,
patrol has the right to stop anyone
right,
and question them and as to what they're, whether they're lawfully in the United
right,
States. You don't have to answer, so it's not quite the
right.
heavy-handed rules that French have, which is obviously the way you guys have some pretty muscular police powers that don't exist in a freer country like ours. But they do have that authority, and they have checkpoints, north of the
Right.
border on certain strategic highways that smugglers would use. So that's the only equivalent we have in the U.S. of that.
It's just I've this is like a little thing that's always struck me as funny. Um, so I guess the next question is, y- Donald Trump names you immigration czar. First 100 days, what do you do?
what Homan is doing, I think, which is first thing to do is stop letting go people that
Right.
you catch at the border, because that's the whole incentive, is that we let them go. Once they're let go, even if they don't have work authorization or what have you, what do they care? They're in the wind. It's not like you, if you're an illegal alien, you can't buy a bus ticket and go
Right.
get a, sleep in your brother-in-law's couch or his guest bedroom and get some kind of illegal job. So being let go is the first attraction. And so you got to stop doing that, which means you're going to have to detain a lot more people, which means you're probably going to have to use military bases near the border to actually house people. That's one of the roles the military is going to play. It's not like they're going to have the 82nd Airborne parachute into immigrant neighborhoods and knock on people's doors. It's logistical assistance, and logistics is what successful militaries are good at. It's more important almost than anything else, and that's we can do that. So, first thing, you stop letting people go. Second is you start issuing what are called detainers. In other words, notices to local police when they arrest somebody and their fingerprints pop up in DHS as, for whatever reason, illegal aliens. Maybe they were deported earlier. Maybe they were admitted legally, but they were supposed to have left 5 years ago and they're still here. Actually send out the notices saying, please hold on to these people. So when you're done with whatever your business is, prosecuting him for drunk driving, whatever it is, let us know. And sanctuary cities don't cooperate in that process, but there's lots of people who get arrested in non-sanctuary cities. And under the Biden
Right.
administration, they just were issuing fewer of those detainer requests. So you want to pick up people who are deportable and that the police have already gotten. And I mean, there's a million things, but the third kind of top thing I would mention is you put on notice the countries that won't take their own people back
Right.
that winter is coming. And, the first thing we're going to do is stop issuing visas, which is in
Right.
statute, that's allowed. But that's only the first thing. And, you don't want to know what else we're coming up with
Yeah.
unless you start taking your own people back.
Yeah.
And that'll work because under Trump 1, they used that power more than any other administration had of the visa sanctions, and especially smaller countries immediately.
Yeah.
Let me add a fourth thing that, again, there's a million things, but a fourth thing that's important is how do you deal with sanctuary cities? And one thing I would do, there's certain
That was my next
funding.
question.
Okay, well, then I'll let you ask the question and then I'll get to
Okay, Mark Krikorian, how do you deal with sanctuary cities?
um, in the first Trump administration, they withheld certain law enforcement funds, funding programs. And the reason they can't just like stop giving any money, like no education department money or whatever, because the Supreme Court has said that anything that the federal government isn't allowed to commandeer state resources. That's the word, commandeering,
Yeah.
for their own purposes. So that when they say, okay, no money for X, there has to be some nexus between the funding program and the policy. So if it's a highway related funding, it could be something related to automobiles or whatever it is.
Right.
So there's a limit to what they can do. They did that during Trump 1, and a couple of jurisdictions did change their policies. The rest of them said, yeah, whatever, forget it. We'll live without the money, and our, corrupt state legislature will make up the difference or whatever it is. But this is an idea that one of our board members, who's retired State Department and maybe back in the State Department next month, he said, just withhold student visas or prohibit any jurisdiction in
Right. We wrote about that.
any
Yeah.
university, yeah, in a sanctuary jurisdiction, just prohibit them from getting foreign students. No University of California foreign students, no NYU, no Columbia. I don't know if it would work or not, but this administration has it out for the universities anyway. I mean, the
Yeah.
vice president has said when he was still in the Senate, he's still in the Senate technically, we should seize the endowments of the universities, kind of like King Henry the Eighth. You know what I mean? Seizing the monasteries. Um, this would be a much milder version of that. In other words, if you're going to choose between those things, but the point is that is going to make them squeal, and maybe they'll put some pressure. We'll see. There's no perfect single silver bullet to end sanctuary cities, but there's some things you can do, and I expect this administration is going to do a
Right.
lot. Yep.
So, yeah, I mean, the point about the universities is very true. I think most people have no idea how much, especially big public universities like the University of California system, are totally dependent on foreign students because they're the ones who pay full freight.
Yep.
And so they're extremely profitable. And they're there to get their degree. They cheat. It's a sort of open secret in many of these places. This is not me saying people are eating dogs and cats in Ohio.
Right.
This is very well known. um so yeah, but let's kind of want to pursue this. So let's um what's to stop the White House, the DOJ, from saying, "Look, illegal immigration is illegal. Abetting illegal immigration is a crime. So, if you're abetting illegal immigration, I'm not gonna, play around with budget threats and so on. I'm gonna arrest you."
Right. Uh,
Uh,
that's definitely possible. Tom Homan has actually alluded to that. And
yes,
so but again, because that's something that's never been done before, I can see them doing it, but it's the kind of thing where you have to pick a really good target, somebody who is so loathsome and so publicly unappealing and
I,
has been
can we find
responsible.
somebody like that in the leadership of big blue cities? No, I don't think they're
Yeah,
they're all,
they
they're
can.
all upstanding citizens. They're all well within the mainstream of American society and politics.
And they'd have to find somebody like that after, link them to some outrage so
Right,
outrageous, you know, raping a 4-year-old girl or something, and they
right,
protected this guy. That's the kind of thing. And then and so in other words, the point is, it's like a lot of these litigators trying to get a case to the Supreme Court. They're looking for
right,
the most sympathetic
right,
plaintiff. In this case, you'd have to find the most unsympathetic defendant
right.
and pursue that. And if they did that, that would get people's attention in sanctuary cities uh, real quick. And
Yeah,
so look, I'm not saying this because I have inside knowledge of what they're planning, but I expect that that is in fact what they're doing. And you'd have to find in a jurisdiction where the U.S. attorney, the federal prosecutor, could try them in a place where you would get a good jury too. In other words,
right.
there's a lot involved, but if they found the right case, that would be like a lever. What did Archimedes say? Give me a lever long enough and I'll move the world. Well,
Yeah.
give me a sanctuary city politician loathsome enough and they can move the world.
Yeah, that's a good observation. So beyond sanctuary cities, again, in this scenario, where Mark Krikorian is czar, actual czar of immigration, not fake DC czar. Um, if you start doing anything, there is this entire nexus of organizations, institutions. Sanctuary cities are one, but NGOs are very well funded by both blue state governments and evil billionaires. Media organizations that are going to run all of the sub stories and not run all of the stories having to do with crime and everything else. Courts, state courts, bad federal courts, activists, protesters, blah 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 blah. This entire nexus that's designed to um, enable this mass immigration. Uh, what do you do about them? Do you just ignore them? I mean, you can say, "Oh, I ignore the bad press and the protests." And it's like, okay, maybe that depends on political will. Fair enough. There's plenty of political will when it comes to immigration in this administration. So, okay. But some of them you can't ignore, right? You can't ignore courts, or can you? But in theory, at least you can't. Um, you can't maybe ignore, certain elements within the bureaucracy. I how do you see that?
Um, there's several things I'd point to. First is they need to have, and I'm pretty sure they are developing, a media strategy of their own, a proactive media strategy, so that when they arrest, somebody who raped the 4-year-old girl
Right.
and the, San Francisco City Council
Right.
tries to protect them, that they're getting ahead of that instead of reacting to it. That's part of it. And I got to say, in a sense, all of the challenges you've described are still real. They're still really there. But it's almost better that Trump lost and was gone for 4 years, because all of those institutions have now additionally delegitimized themselves in the
True.
eyes of the public over the past 4 years, that one of the reasons Trump did so well
Yeah.
is that they have less power than they used to. And so they, as part of their media strategy, they're going to need to um, exploit the alternative media pathways that they did, podcasters and all the rest of it, conservative media. So they need to have, part of it needs to be not just going after illegal aliens. They need a sort of anti-legacy media strategy. And that applies obviously not just to immigration, but they're going to have to deal with that if they try to, abolish the Department of Education, all kinds of things like that.
Yeah.
Um, Judges is that's a challenge. I'm not one of these, now they ruled, let them enforce it. I still kind of want to have a more or less sort of functional system of rule of law. But the Supreme Court actually, in the end, ended up um, backing the administration on a number, like on the travel ban case. It took them a long time, but they eventually won in the Supreme Court, so that they've got precedents now that will make it easier, or that will shorten the amount of time courts can block what they're doing and interfere with it. The advocacy groups, um, first of all, they need to defund them from the federal end, because look, they're getting a lot of federal money.
Definitely.
And the other thing is, there are going to be protests. I mean, and they're going to be, they're going to want to, like, have a human
Right.
chain around an ICE facility, that kind of stuff. They're going
Right.
to do some of that stuff. Um, Again, it's the kind of thing where they need to be proactive in a media strategy. So get them to do those kind of protests on behalf of the most loathsome people you can imagine, so as to
Right.
delegitimize the protesters in the eyes of the public at large.
Interesting.
Um, you know, I'm not. It's not like I have a 4-point program that I can just email over to them and say, okay, this is what you need to do. But that's what they need. In other words, they aren't going to just be able to wipe this stuff out, but they
Right.
can, in fact, do better in prevailing against it than, frankly, they could have 4 years ago. Because if it had just been a second Trump administration, from
Right.
2020, they wouldn't have. They would be in a worse position than they
Yeah.
are now in some respects.
Yeah. I mean, the Biden administration has been, quote unquote, very good,
Yeah,
very good for the cause, because they went so far on the other extreme, just completely abandoning the notion of having any border, any enforcement.
it was Lenin who said, "Чем хуже, тем лучше." The worse, the better. And so,
Yeah.
in a sense, they have pushed this so far that it actually expands what the Trump administration is going to be able to do.
Yeah. Um, okay. So there's another issue in this sort of whole spectrum of, what do we do early on, is, and this is sort of, we're getting to the pain points within the Republican coalition, which is there's a lot of people who believe, and I tend to think they're right, but I may not be. You'll tell me, because you know more about this stuff. That you're not going to get serious immigration enforcement unless you start raiding businesses and arresting or otherwise punishing business owners who hire illegals. And this is where the sort of the rubber meets the road, because of course the business community is, very important. The Republican coalition, Republicans hate to do anything that business owners and business leaders don't like. And so um what's your view on that? I guess, is it necessary to do these raids and to specifically go after businesses and business owners and CEOs or whatever? And B, if it is necessary, are we going to do it? And what's the political fallout going to be?
Yes, it's essential. There's no question about it,
Okay.
because turning off or at least weakening the magnet of jobs is one of the keys of limiting illegal immigration. If it's hard to get a job, I mean, the broad goal of immigration enforcement,
Stands to reason to me, but
yeah, other than actually arresting people, is to make it as hard, as impractical as possible to live here illegally. In other
right.
words, that's driver's licenses, all kinds of things, but jobs is the most important thing. The reason, there's a couple of things that have changed over the years. One is, at least at the big business level, the Republicans couldn't care less what they think anymore to some degree. In other words, large businesses are now part of the opposite coalition. Now, small business, that's a different thing, obviously, and medium size and all of that. I mean, so what you're saying is still correct. It's not quite as correct as it was before. Republicans, it's no longer, what's good for General Motors is good for America, as the uh, chairman of General Motors
Yeah,
said
yeah,
back
yeah.
in the 50s.
I mean, it hasn't changed that much, and those big businesses still give a lot of money to Republicans in
They do.
Congress.
Yeah.
Um, and if you think of a sector like agriculture, for example, my understanding is that there's a lot of illegal immigrant labor, and Republicans love, big ag, small ag, medium ag.
Yeah.
Um,
Agriculture is the one place, is sort of the last place I would go to. Precise, and I mean that in a kind of strategic sense, because
right,
number one, it's a tiny share of the economy. It just is. I mean, especially the kinds that illegal aliens are involved in. Illegal aliens are not swinging scythes in North Dakota harvesting wheat. They're, the vast majority of our agriculture is
I
done with
assume
machines.
nobody is swinging a scythe anymore in America, because
I'm hoping not. But if you saw some of the ways that fresh fruit and vegetables are harvested,
right,
and this is United Farm Workers makes a big deal of this before Thanksgiving. These
right,
your the food on your table is, and they have people. There's this one that really struck me. It's this guy, kneeling in the dirt and
yeah,
pulling out radishes, and
right,
bundling them up or whatever it is, and it's like, well, it's no disrespect to this guy. He's obviously a hardworking person, but why is a modern society having,
yeah,
feeding itself with peasant labor kneeling in the dirt, pulling plants out with their hands? It's insane. But anyway, my point here is that ag, number one, is a small sector of the overall economy anyway, a very small sector, a
yes,
share of the illegal workforce, and is uniquely um, has unique access to Republicans because they're in rural districts. And
yes,
so my point is, I'm not saying they're off the hook, but they already have an unlimited guest worker program if they wanted to go through the red tape to use it. And not to get pushback, I would start with other industries where the illegal aliens actually work. But yes, there is going to be worksite enforcement. There's no question. I mean, Tom Homan has said as much.
okay,
And again, it's like the other things that I referred to. You want to start with employers that are already complete dirtbags and are locking the exits and are employing 13-year-olds and all of
Right.
that stuff, and then
Right.
raid them. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so we just raid the least sympathetic employers. And that actually has a real enforcement
By the
benefit
way, that
too.
employer's probably an immigrant himself.
Could be. It's entirely possible. Probably the same ethnic group too. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? It's but the advantage of that also is that you want to be able to lock up some American employers for actual
Yes.
criminal activity. And the problem is the law says knowing employment is what's illegal. And so,
Oh.
it's like, well, their social security card with Mickey Mouse's face on it looked okay to me, that kind of thing. When you raid a factory, you can turn the illegal immigrants and say, look, we won't send you to jail. You'll get a free
Right.
trip home and clean record. You have to go home, but you're not going to jail if you give us
Right.
intel on who were the employees of the company, the management that
Right.
knew what was going on. They did that in Iowa with some
Oh,
success at a
really?
meat packer there, and everybody knew that this was a dirty operation, just in general, all kinds of respects, overtime, occupational safety and health, everything. They couldn't get the goods until they raided it, and then the illegal immigrants themselves started singing like canaries. Um,
Sounds like they should have called the French customs, and they would have gotten all of the
Exactly.
evidence they
Yeah,
needed.
there's a river that goes through Iowa. They could have done it. but but the thing is, most employers aren't dirtbags. They're just regular people. And we need to give them a way to make sure that they're protecting themselves. And that's why E-Verify, which is this
Right.
online system, when you hire somebody, is essential. But I actually think there's a way to go beyond it. And one of our board members who was in the first Trump DHS calls it G verify, government verifying it. And this is something that can be done through regulation, which
Oh,
is to
interesting. That
say,
was my next question. So
yeah,
can you
which
can
is,
you please explain that?
yeah,
Because my impression was you can only do e-verify through legislation.
legislation. Yes. E-verify, everybody assumes it can only be done by an act of Congress because it's voluntary now. There's two wrinkles here. One is one of our analysts, who's a immigration judge and is long experience on this, says actually you could probably do even e-verify, mandate it through regulation because the law says that the government shall determine what the means are or something. I forget the exact wording. He wrote about this. That would go to the courts. Um, Nonetheless, um, my idea was of this G verify is where you take all the onus off the employers altogether. Because the way it works now is an employer hires somebody, he has to enter his information for social security and tax purposes.
Yeah.
And then there's a separate site for e-verify where you enter
Yep.
the name, social security number, date of birth. Um, and we've done it. We use it. We've used it for years. We don't hire that many people, but when we hire people, we run them through
You make
e-verify.
sure to run them through e-verify.
Oh, absolutely. Oh,
That's
absolutely.
really
Everybody.
funny.
Yeah. And you have to do it for everybody if you're going to do it.
Well,
Um,
good.
and it's easy to do. It's not a big deal. And the main people who come back as negatives are women who didn't change their names with Social Security when they got married,
Right.
or that kind of thing. So it's actually almost a public service to make sure that the government knows your right information. But with G Verify, which they actually did draft a regulation to this effect, so it's not just some sort of vaporware. Um, when the employer enters the standard tax information, Social Security information, the government then verifies and makes sure it's real on its own. In other words, it's one step. It's taking out this other
All
step.
right.
And the employer doesn't have any paperwork requirements about they have to maintain the paperwork on the employee for a certain number of years. It takes the whole thing off of them. The problem there is uh, getting Social Security to want to do it. The Social Security Administration wants nothing
Right.
to do with legal status. IRS couldn't care less as long as you give them the
Right.
money. And so that would be the kind of thing you would need somebody like, say, Stephen Miller or somebody he's tasked on this to
Right.
go in there and basically start
Make them
banging
do it.
heads together
Yeah.
and saying, look, we're going to set up an institutionalized, systematic way of doing this. And I don't care whether you like it or not. And if you don't like
Right.
it, you
You're
can
fired.
go to the Greenland office of the state of the Social Security Administration and live there for the rest of your life. In other words, that's not a legal challenge. It's
Yes,
not
yes.
even really a funding challenge. It's
An
basically
organizational.
kicking bureaucratic behind and getting, once the system is up, it'll be almost sort of self-functioning, but
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
getting
yeah, yeah.
over that hump. So anyway, yes, that's essential because,
That's
like I said,
fascinating.
most employers want to do the right thing. They're not criminals, but they need to be given some kind of practical way to
Yeah.
stay legal.
Yeah.
And if you do that, doesn't mean there won't be any illegal immigration. There'll still be people working for cash, hanging out in front of the Home Depot parking lot, that kind of thing. But that's a much smaller phenomenon than the kind
Right.
of mass
Right.
illegality we're dealing with now.
Right. Um that's very interesting. Well, I mean, at least Republicans have a great track record of bending the deep state to their will and implementing policy through the administrative state. So, I'm very optimistic. Well, I'm just being snarky for the sake of being snarky. The one thing that's true is we're more aware of the problem than we've ever been.
Yeah.
Um,
And more aware of the deep state problem, I guess. In other
yes,
words, not
yeah,
even just the immigration
that's
one.
the
And
problem
so,
I meant. That
right. Yeah.
knowing how to actually push through the thing through the administrative machine
Right. And that
matters a
is
great deal.
And that is something, I mean, they understand that challenge, broadly speaking, and that's why
Yes,
they're talking about this Schedule F issue, which I
yes,
don't really understand, but the point is make it possible to remove
yes,
bureaucrats much more
yes,
easily. Because,
yes.
we had this civil service reform in the 19th century where before that,
Yep,
it was all patronage, and basically every
yep.
post office was run by whoever, your cronies of the, elected official was. That went a little too far, but frankly, past 100 years, we've clearly gone way too far in the other direction now. There needs to be some
Patronage is a
course correction.
sacrament. It is a visible outward sign of an inward grace, and that grace is power.
Yeah, well, there you go. Yep.
That was Benjamin Disraeli. Because the Brits did it 20 years before, and of course, the French did it 500 years ago. But
Right. Yep.
um, it's been a mixed bag. Um, okay, so we had a previous interview some months ago. We talked about the Biden stuff, which is no longer current. We talked about the Trump stuff. There was one thing in your interview which I loved, which I thought was very interesting and fascinating, and which is evergreen, which is called Remain in Mongolia. So, can you please explain what Remain in Mongolia is and why it's a
Sure.
good idea?
Let me start with Remain in Mexico, which was
Right.
the actual program that I wanted to find a country that also started with M. So that's why I came up with Mongolia. But Remain in Mexico was the Trump administration's solution to a spike that happened in illegal crossings at the border. Interestingly, the spike was caused by the end of that family separation policy. And
Right.
all of the smugglers said, okay, now's our chance. Let's grab a kid and you'll be able to get in. So, Remain in Mexico was the Trump administration solution. It's provided for in statute. It's not called that, but statute allows the administration either or requires them either to detain illegal border crossers until their case is finished, or have them wait outside the country until their hearing dates come up. And so they crafted Remain in Mexico. And the point was, you come across the border, you say the magic words, you read the card that the smugglers gave you of what you're supposed to say about I fear persecution.
Right.
Um, and instead of letting you go, they send you back across the border. Mexico had to agree to take Latin Americans who made
Right.
those claims, Spanish speakers, not, people from Kazakhstan or whatever necessarily. So, and it worked immediately. I mean, it's like almost overnight, the huge surge in bogus asylum claimants stopped.
Right.
It's, not dissimilar to what Italy is trying to have with Albania.
Yeah,
Um,
everybody's doing a version of this or
right,
contemplating a version of this.
exactly. Australia started it, some version of it. They called it the Pacific Solution a number of years ago. Um, and it worked. It was amazingly good. There are two weaknesses, though. One is Mexico had to agree,
Right.
and because they're a sovereign country, and yes, those people came through Mexico, and they shouldn't have allowed that, but they did. And once they're in it's like musical chairs. When the music stops, we were stuck with them. The other problem is that it's basically kind of a half measure because they're still allowed to apply for asylum in the United States, when in fact they already passed through usually at least half a dozen other countries before they got here.
Right.
So why should they even be permitted to apply for asylum? And so this is the insight. This is my Remain in Mongolia idea, is that we need to develop relationships with a number of other countries, and so that when someone crosses the border illegally and makes an asylum claim, uh, our response is not, okay, we're going to put you in the queue with an asylum judge and you'll see them in 2037 or something, and in the meantime
Yeah.
have a nice day. Rather, it would be
Not just have a nice day, have a work permit.
have a work permit, yeah, or hold you in custody and have to pay for all of it the whole time. The response should be, you may or may not have a legitimate asylum claim. We're not even going to assess it. We don't care, because anyone who makes an asylum claim after having crossed illegally, we ship to Mongolia. And you can make an asylum claim in Mongolia, and we're going to have to pay them, and you pay Mongolia to do it, obviously, and pay for hold all of that stuff. It's going to cost us money, but it's a bargain at twice the price
Right.
compared to the alternative. And once people realize that crossing the border and making an asylum claim will end you up in Mongolia, a lot fewer people are going to do it. Let's face
Right.
it. And it
Right.
wouldn't just, again, Mongolia, it starts with an M, and they may actually be willing because they're sandwiched between Russia and China, and they may want to have, friendly relations with the United States, and they're a big country, and we'll pay them handsomely and, buy their mistresses apartments and all of that stuff. You know what I mean? So, but, it could be Botswana, it could be Paraguay. The British Foreign Office, when they were still pursuing this Remain in Rwanda, as I called it, version, where they would send people to Rwanda, they went around and talked to countries all over the world to see
Yep.
whether they'd be willing to do it. To Armenia, to I think Botswana, all kinds of places. And some of them were a flat out no. I think Kenya said no, under no circumstance. They got to know more Somalis than they know what to do with. They don't need more people. But some of them, I think Armenia was one of them, said, well, what's it worth to you? So in other words, they were willing to do business
Yeah.
because the numbers just wouldn't be that big, because people would stop coming.
Right.
Australia had a deal like this with Cambodia, where if you came over in a boat and they got you, they would put you
Yep.
in these detention facilities. They had two of them in nearby island countries, but they would fly you free to Cambodia and make an asylum claim there. And only 5 people took them up on it. Even though Cambodia, I mean, I
A
probably
beautiful
wouldn't. I mean,
country.
yeah, it's a beautiful place. It's nobody's going to kill you there. You know what I mean? It's a normal place. 5 people took them up. 4 of them gave up and went back to their home countries after going to Cambodia. So obviously they weren't all that interested. They weren't real asylum seekers.
Right.
And you're seeing a smaller version of that now in Mexico, where if we end, when Trump comes in and the party's over, their reporters have spoken to like Venezuelans and others who were like, yeah, this stinks. I'm just going to go home.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you weren't really in a no Jew
Right.
fleeing Nazi
Right.
Germany in 1937 is saying, oh, well, I'll just go back to Germany. Those are real asylum seekers.
Right.
Almost no one who is seeking asylum in the United States now is an actual
Right.
asylum seeker.
Right. I mean, that's the genius of it, which is it sort of calls the bluff,
Right.
and which is exactly that. Like, if you're actually like desperately fleeing, a Holocaust or a genocide or whatever, you'll say yes, please fly me to Mongolia.
Yep.
And the United States has, saved somebody from a horrible genocide. Like, we've done it. But of course, the reason why this horrifies the left is because they know just as well as we do that 99% of the asylum claims are bogus, and they don't care, and they just want to flood the country with immigrants, and they don't care who they are or how they come here. So I just think it's wonderful, and I think it's very aptly named. So I have one last question, which is more of a science fiction question. Um,
I'm a big sci-fi fan, so
not literally science fiction, but kind of. So basically, the question is, and I'm going to sort of uh, elaborate on why I think it's not as stupid a question as it sounds. What do you think are the prospects for legislation on immigration? And I'm trying to look for a synonym of comprehensive, because obviously the term comprehensive is cursed.
right.
Something that's actually comprehensive, like a big bill that gets passed by Congress and signed by the president, that solves most of the issues related to immigration and sort of lasts for decades, the way that Reagan's law, for whatever its pluses and minuses, lasted for decades, or Hartzell, or whatever its pluses or minuses, lasted for decades. And so the precipice for this is always, the discourse was, why won't Republicans get behind comprehensive immigration reform, is because they got screwed over the first time under Reagan, where we said, oh, you have to amnesty people who are already there, but don't worry, we'll enforce everything, and so we won't have this problem again. So, you just grandfather in people who are already here, but then it's going to be fixed. And they got completely screwed over, and so they don't want to be screwed over the second time. Well, the flip side of that is, if Trump and Homan and Miller and all those other guys solve, and then really solve, the problem of illegal immigration, then why not, sit around a table with, whatever sane Democrats are out there, and say, all right, let's we
Make a
all know
deal.
H-1B is broken. We all know a bunch of this stuff is broken. Like, let's actually fix it. So, science fiction?
Right. No, not really. It's and the way you're describing it, the sort of sequence of events makes sense because the previous deals, either the 86 amnesty or the various ones that failed under Bush Jr. and
Right,
Obama, all were amnesty first, promises of
right,
enforcement in the future. And and in addition to promises of enforcement, they just increased the numbers,
right,
legal immigration numbers, in addition. So the whole thing was a total disaster all around. Um, what we need to see, from my opinion, to get to a more kind of an equilibrium on immigration. It's not like everybody's going to agree, but like you said, get to a system that's more or less functional and more or less broadly supported.
right.
Is enforcement first without any quid pro quos,
Yeah,
no deals, no nothing. The enforcement has to happen. The illegal population will shrink. It's not going to disappear, but it'll shrink. Then, once there is real credibility on immigration and we have in place the systems that are necessary to limit future illegal immigration, um, then you have a kind of Nixon goes to China
right.
moment. And I'm, you know, to me, that seems like the kind of thing that happens in the J.D. Vance administration. where the illegal immigration problem has been tamed. It's never going away. People still steal cars. It's illegal, but it's not like in most places, unless you're in like San Francisco or something, that's endemic. So once we tame illegal immigration, the deal that I would foresee that we sit around a table with Democrats is, okay, the illegal immigrants who are still here, uh, we amnesty. Not a lot of 13-year path to citizenship. Just rip the Band-Aid off. The way we did in 86, it was actually relative. They had to take a class on civics and what have you in English. I mean, I
Really?
don't know. Huh? They did. Yeah,
Really?
they did.
Oh, that's funny.
Um, but, but
That's like an SNL sketch,
yeah,
waiting
well,
to
I know. Yeah.
happen.
Yeah.
The nice lady Peace Corps volunteer and like the Mexican,
And the group's got all this
orange
money.
picker.
Yeah. The group's got all this money for it too, so it was that part.
Yeah, of
That part,
course.
maybe I won't be for. But anyway, the point is a relatively
We'll
clean.
send them a list of YouTube videos about the Constitution. How about
There
that?
you go. Yeah, that's better than the alternative, maybe. But a kind of streamlined amnesty for the
Okay.
bulk of people in exchange for permanent deep cuts in legal immigration in the future. That would be, in other words, it's sort of combining 1986 law with the 1924 immigration reductions. You know what I mean? It's sort of a hybrid of those.
Interesting. Interesting.
That's the deal. And that kind of calls the Democrats bluff, because it's like, okay, well,
Right.
you're saying that however many million illegal aliens are still left. Let's say there's 7 million illegal aliens left after real
Right.
enforcement has
Right.
squeezed it and all of that, which is not crazy. I mean, I'd prefer
Yeah,
maybe
it sounds
5 or 6. It
yeah.
could be 7. Um, if you're serious about stabilizing those people so that they can function normally above board in society, which frankly they kind of do anyway. But with the new enforcement rules, it will be pushing people back into the shadows, because they say, illegal immigrants are in the shadows. And then I open the front page of my newspaper and there's illegal aliens talking about it. So they're not really in the shadows all that
Right.
much. But if we have a real enforcement regime, they will be back in the shadows. And so calling the Democrats bluff is like, okay, we are willing in a streamlined, relatively simple way, let these
Right.
people participate in normal life. The deal is we're cutting legal immigration by 50 or 60% in statute, without a lot of escape hatches and all that BS. So we don't, we can kind of bring this latest immigration wave to an end the way the 1924 law brought the Ellis Island wave to an end.
Yep.
Now, it did it in a stupid way back then with these national origins quotas. It was all based on this, Nordic head shapes and or superior, whatever. It's all kind of this baloney from the 19th century. But, without that nonsense, we can just reduce immigration dramatically in a relatively simple, with a system that's relatively simple. That is the way I see it. And that's not quite science fiction. I think that's potentially doable, though I wouldn't be betting my mortgage on it's actually happening.
Okay. Um. All right. Well, it's episode 5 of 500. We haven't had like our traditional question to end the interview with. I'm gonna come up with one on the spot.
Okay.
Um,
Like, what's my favorite food or something like that? Or,
recommend a book, preferably one that's not about your topic of professional interest.
oh, just
Um,
any book.
any book, fiction,
Uh,
nonfiction, and then explain why.
I would say The Canticle for Leibowitz.
That's a very good choice. Very
Yeah.
good choice. All right.
Science.
Why?
I've read it twice now, and the first time I read it, I think I was in high school, and it's a post-apocalyptic book, and it kind of, it appeals to my various interests. It's Leibowitz is like some uh, Jewish guy who was going shopping during the, when the nuclear war happened, and they end up turning him into like a saint, and they have a monastery devoted to Saint Leibowitz and all this. And the point is, it's a pessimistic book, and I'm a conservative, so I'm kind of a pessimist. Although I'm an optimistic pessimist, I think, is the way to put it, because humanity destroys itself again, in the end, and it sort
Oh
of,
yeah, that's right.
yeah,
That's right.
it moves
Spoiler
forward.
alert.
Yeah, spoiler. Yeah, sorry. Okay, yeah. Well, the book's been out for a while, so what can I say?
Yeah,
So
it's a classic. Yeah,
yeah,
spoilers don't count for classics. You're
yeah.
supposed to have read the classics.
Yes, exactly. So that's my. There's other classics I haven't read, but that one I have.
I totally second that recommendation. It's a book with a deeply Catholic imagination,
Yeah,
and it's also the
I say
prose
this.
is
I'm
great.
Armenian Orthodox, just to be clear, but it's it's
uh,
it's a deeply traditionalist Christian
right, right.
animated by those views. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to
Yeah,
interrupt
yeah,
you.
no. But as somebody who has practiced the craft of writing on a professional or semi-professional basis for many, many years, it's also a book with wonderful prose, which is something that I always notice and cherish. I would say people will send me angry email. Oh no, they won't because nobody watches this. Th- uh in science fiction, it's rare to find writing where the quality of the prose is at the
Right.
levels of, high literature or whatever.
Not to get
Uh,
off topic, but there's another author I really like who isn't all that good at prose. Harry Turtledove. Have you read his
I
stuff?
don't I no,
He
haven't
writes
read him.
alternative history. The book that really broke through was Guns of the South,
Oh, yes, yes, I'm
where
actually reading it now.
yeah, it's a really good book. South African
Yes,
apartheid hardliners develop a time
yes,
machine and take
it's
AK
really
47s
yeah,
back to Lee's army because AK 47s are
right.
simple enough that they could
Yes,
actually
yes,
produce the ammo. Because if you go back to ancient Rome and with an aircraft carrier, what happens when you run out of gas? You know what I
right,
mean? It's like,
right.
but anyway, Turtle
Yes,
Dove,
yes.
that book was actually tightly edited, I think. He's written a lot. He writes just
No,
constantly,
he's
churns
written
stuff out.
tons of them.
The problem is that the stuff that he churns out isn't edited all that carefully, and the writing isn't always great.
There's another one. So that it's funny because Guns of the South, I bought it like a week ago and started reading
Okay.
it.
We didn't
And that's
plan on this. That's complete coincidence.
yeah, and that's because I previously read another book. I'm gonna find it. Jamie, pull it up. Uh, Agent of Byzantium.
Yeah, right.
And the concept there is that
I just read that actually a few months ago. It's a
oh
series of
really?
short stories. Yeah.
Yes,
Well,
it's
he's
it's
got a
like
whole
episodic.
universe. He has a whole universe,
Yeah.
and there's a whole bunch of stories,
Oh really?
novels and short stories, where Mohammed becomes a Christian monk,
Yes.
and
Saint
then
Muhammad.
sort of, yeah, and the empire survives,
Yes.
into the Middle Ages,
Right.
as a big functional empire. Anyway, but
Yes.
my point is, some of his short stories are tighter, and so the writing is better. When
Right.
he ends
Okay.
up having to fill up a 7 novel series, um, the writing, my writing probably wouldn't be great if I had to fill up 7 novels
Right.
either.
Right.
So,
Right. Right.
but no, Harry Turtledove's definitely worth reading. A lot of his short stories are really striking.
Yeah, yeah, no, I also second that recommendation. And so, Agent of Byzantium, very, 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 very good, very fun. And so the universe is Muhammad converts to Christianity. There's no Islam, and therefore the Roman Empire sort of continues forever. And Agent of Byzantium is a set of short stories about a man who's like the secret agent of the Byzantine Empire. Yeah, no, it's great, and I've only begun Guns of the South, but it certainly seems like a lot of fun. Well, there you go. I found my final question. It's been great. Thank you very much for your time and your expertise on a very important issue in which you're truly one of the leading experts in the country. Um, And I hope people enjoyed this. And next week's episode will be I don't know who, because that's how we do things at the High Production Value Sphere podcast. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pascal. And I recommend to all your listeners to subscribe to your Policy Sphere daily news roundup.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.